6 teenagers and their pastor left for a church choir tour in 1993. They never came home. The church claimed the trip was canceled. The police said there was no record of them leaving. But 30 years later, during a drought in New Mexico, a van rose from the cracked earth, and it told a different story. Before I begin, thank you for watching Minority Struggles. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It means everything to know we're telling these stories together. Now, let me tell you what really happened. The sun beat down on the gravel lot behind New Light Missionary Baptist Church as 7 folding chairs sat neatly in a circle. It was June 10th, 1993, and Augusta, Georgia, buzzed with heat and summer anticipation. Inside the modest church building, the sound of a tambourine echoed faintly beneath a wave of teenage laughter and warm alto harmonies. Reverend Paul Shepard stood near the front pew, hands folded, watching the youth choir wrap up one final rehearsal before their long-awaited summer tour. He was a sturdy man, mid-40s, dressed in a short-sleeved button-down and dark slacks, eyes soft but firm. He had seen a lot in his life: marches, arrests, changes in the wind, but nothing worried him quite like driving a van full of black children across unfamiliar highways in the Deep South. "All right, saints," he called gently. "If y'all sing like that in El Paso, the spirit gone beat us there." The kids laughed, some already folding robes, others stuffing lyric sheets into backpacks. Denise Hill was braiding Kiana's hair in the corner, teasing her about getting it done just to sweat out again. Travis was recording everything with his little cassette deck, narrating like he was already famous. "This is day 1 of the New Light tour. Watch out, world, we coming." Maurice Tucker, 17, was already checking the van out front, brakes, tires, coolant. He was the only teen Paul trusted behind the wheel besides himself. Maurice had a quiet maturity, a mechanic's brain, and hands that never stopped moving. He'd been under that hood since dawn. They were scheduled to stop in Mississippi, then Shreveport, and eventually El Paso, hosting gospel nights and handing out food donations along the way. The last-minute reroute through Vidor, Texas, had come from the diocese. Bishop Redden called it an urgent spiritual opportunity with a partner church. Paul had hesitated. He knew the history, but they needed the church's financial support for the tour, and Redden insisted it would be brief. 3 days into the trip, everything still felt blessed. They performed in Jackson, shared meals in Baton Rouge, and slept on church floors with open windows and fans humming overhead. Denise cracked jokes. Jamal clung to Reverend Paul's side during every rest stop. Gloria scribbled revised lyrics into her red notebook. Then came Vidor. They pulled in late afternoon, looking for the address Redden had given. The small East Texas town sat still and hot, surrounded by pine trees and silence. The gas station clerk pointed them to a motel. The motel manager, a middle-aged white man in stained khakis, stared at the group and said there were no vacancies. Paul gestured to the empty lot. The man shrugged. "No rooms left. Sorry." The diner next door had "restrooms out of order" taped to the door. The gas station pump wouldn't take their church fuel card. Every adult they met looked through them. Every smile felt strained. Paul tried to keep the group calm, but Maurice noticed the way cars slowed as they passed. Denise leaned over to Paul that evening and whispered, "This place don't want us here, Reverend." They parked the van behind a shuttered gas station to regroup, deciding to sleep inside the vehicle that night. The choir gathered in the back, as they always did, and began to hum softly. Travis set his recorder on the dashboard. Gloria led them in His Eye is on the Sparrow. The harmony echoed off metal and windows. That's the last anyone saw of them. The next morning, the van was gone. No calls came home. No choir showed up in El Paso. The church released a vague bulletin. Due to internal confusion, the tour has been postponed. Reverend Elwood, the junior deacon who stayed behind, stood at the pulpit and tried not to cry as confused parents filled the pews. The police claimed no van was ever reported missing. The bishop's office said the choir likely deviated from the tour and went off on their own. Families were told to grieve privately. Denise's mother pushed for an investigation. She printed missing posters herself. They were quietly taken down 6 days later. The church refused press interviews. The van was never found. For 30 years, New Light went silent on the matter. Paul Shepard, Gloria, Travis, Kiana, Jamal, Denise, and Maurice became whispers in hallways, memories at altars, ghosts in Sunday hymns. Then came the drought. In 2023, a brutal heat wave hit northern New Mexico, shrinking rivers and evaporating lakes. Abiquiu Reservoir, once used for irrigation and summer baptisms, dried until the bottom cracked open like a broken shell. A research team from UNM's Environmental Sciences program arrived in early July to conduct sediment studies. Devin Scott, a 24-year-old grad student, was taking measurements on the eastern edge of the lake bed when he tripped over something metal. At first, he thought it was a fishing boat, but the shape was wrong. He called over his supervisor. They dug with gloved hands and found more metal, then broken glass, and eventually a full door. Faded letters, nearly erased by rust and mud, came into view. Youth Choir Tour 1993. Amina Tucker was at the university as a guest lecturer that same week. She taught forensic anthropology. Her uncle Maurice had run away, according to her family, or at least that's what they were told. She had stopped asking questions a long time ago, until someone showed her a photo of the van. Amina walked out to the site alone. The desert heat beat down on her scalp. She stood over the half-exposed vehicle, gloved hands gripping the doorframe, and peered inside. Shoes, a melted tambourine, a rotted robe with pink stitching, KB, and tucked beneath the passenger seat, a crumpled hymnal with handwriting on the margins. Engine specs, oil change dates, tire pressure notes, Morris's handwriting. Her knees buckled as she sat in the dirt. For the first time in her adult life, Amina Tucker believed her uncle didn't run. He was taken, and now the earth, 30 years later, had decided to speak. The moment the van was fully unearthed from the dried reservoir, the air around it turned still. It rested crooked on one side, its front bumper lodged in hardened sediment, its paint peeled and weathered to near gray. But the lettering, barely legible under streaks of dirt, still whispered the truth. New Light Missionary Baptist Church. Youth Choir Tour, 1993. Dr. Amina Tucker didn't speak at first. She stood with her arms crossed tightly against her chest, eyes locked on the vehicle that had haunted her family without ever being named. She had been 11 years old when her uncle Maurice vanished. Her mother cried in private for weeks, but no one in the family ever said the word dead. They just said gone. And eventually, they said don't bring it up anymore. Now here she was, 30 years later, staring at what was left of him. New Mexico State Police had cordoned off the site as a precaution, but Amina had credentials they couldn't ignore. Forensic anthropology professor, university liaison, and though she didn't tell them at first, next of kin. She moved carefully around the van as investigators took photographs. When the back doors finally creaked open with the help of crowbars and rusted hinges, the first wave of heat and decay hit them like breath from a sealed tomb. Inside, the past had been preserved in mud and mildew. Choir robes, pink, blue, cream, lay stiff and darkened from time and water. A tambourine sat wedged between two seats, its frame swollen. A scuffed name tag hung loosely from a cracked vinyl lanyard, Gloria Bell. In the dashboard compartment, a broken inhaler, a melted pen, and a church bulletin bearing the name Reverend Paul Shepard. But it was what she found under the front passenger seat that made Amina sink to her knees. A hymnal, warped and fused along the edges, had a few loose pages still intact. Scribbled in small, angled handwriting in the back cover were maintenance notes. Rotate tires before Mississippi. Fuel at 1/2. Check gauge. Oil slow leak. M. Tucker. She ran her fingers over the ink. Her uncle's shorthand, the way he always signed notes. The same slanted T in Tucker she used to mimic when she was a girl. This wasn't a ghost story. This was real. The investigators worked methodically. They tagged each artifact, dusted for any trace evidence that might survive the decades, and prepared the vehicle for transport. Amina requested to remain with the van until it reached the forensic lab in Santa Fe. They granted her permission. That night, under low lamplight in the facility garage, Amina returned to the van alone. The technicians had carefully removed additional debris from the console. She reached into the now-cleared dashboard and felt a foreign texture, flat, rectangular. A cassette tape. She pulled out slowly. The label was faded, but readable. Sunday practice, Vidor. Her stomach tightened. She sealed it into an evidence pouch and brought it to the technician on call. The next morning, the lead analyst from the New Mexico cold case unit arrived. His name was Mark Dandridge, late 50s, sharp with quiet eyes. He asked Amina to walk him through what she knew. My uncle's name was Maurice Tucker. He was 17 in 1993, the youngest of four. He was the driver for the youth choir tour. Dandridge flipped through a folder. No official report filed from Georgia. No missing vehicle alert. No police record of a van or driver by that name being searched for. Amina tilted her head. That can't be right. It says here the vehicle was reported as stolen, Dandridge said, tapping the file. June 16, 1993. Report filed by a diocesan office in Atlanta, not the church in Augusta. They claimed the van was taken without authorization. Amina's voice dropped. So they never said it was missing. No, Dandridge confirmed. As far as the official record goes, this was property loss, not a disappearance. She closed her eyes. They'd buried it. Not just the van, the story, the names, the responsibility. The church hadn't lost 7 people. It had discarded them. Later that day, a team assembled to carefully play and digitize the cassette tape. Amina sat with Dandridge behind the glass, watching the text slide it into the machine. A soft whir, then silence, then static. And then a voice. This is Travis, a teenage boy announced playfully. We're parked in Vidor, Texas. Gloria's mad, 'cause she think her note is flat, but she's wrong. Anyway, y'all, it's Sunday night, and we're still together. Thank God for small miracles. Then laughter. Shuffling. A faint beat on a tambourine. Someone sings. His eye is on the sparrow. The song fades into background chatter. Then something shifts. A hard knock. A man's voice, sharp and unfamiliar. You people shouldn't be here. Then Reverend Shepherd's voice, calm, low. We're resting, sir. We're just passing through. Another knock. This time harder. Metal creaks. A shout. Open the door. And then all at once, screaming, a scuffle, the sound of something dropped, and static. The tape ran for another 2 minutes before ending in silence. No one moved. Amina blinked back the moisture in her eyes. The room felt colder than before. They didn't run, she said quietly. They didn't steal that van. They were trying to get home. Detective Dandridge gave her a long look. Who else knows about this? He asked. Only me, she said. And now you. He nodded. We need to find who made that report, and who signed off on it. Amina folded the evidence pouch carefully. There's one more person I want to talk to first, she said. He was there, not on the trip, but at the church. He stayed behind that summer. His name is Pastor Richard Elwood. Dandridge raised a brow. Think he remembers? If he does, she replied. He's kept it buried for 30 years. They stood in silence a moment longer as the tape rewound on the machine behind the glass. The song began again, faint and pure. The last thing they sang before they disappeared. The heat in Vidor that evening clung to the air like smoke. It was June 13th, 1993. The sun was dropping behind the pines, but the heat hadn't gone with it. The New Light Youth Choir van sat parked behind a shuttered gas station, half hidden by a sagging chain-link fence. Dust covered the windows, and a stack of Bibles sat beside the back row of seats, marked with folded program sheets and choir notes. Inside the van, Travis Milton adjusted the small cassette recorder wedge between his knees. He checked the levels, tapped the mic twice, and grinned. This is day 4 of the New Light Summer Tour. We just rolled into Vidor, Texas. Still no AC. Gloria's tired, Denise is mad, and Reverend Paul told us we could rehearse before lights out. So here we go. He looked over at Kiana and winked. Roll tape. The air inside the van was tight with sweat and quiet resolve. They'd all felt the shift the moment they crossed the town limits. The stares were different. Not just curiosity, but cold watching. Every storefront they passed looked like it didn't want them there. The motel they'd been told to stay at had turned them away with a half-hearted lie about plumbing issues. The diner wouldn't serve them. The bathrooms at the gas station had locks they weren't given keys for. Reverend Paul Shepard tried to remain calm, gentle as always, but he was visibly on edge. He had grown up in Mississippi. He knew the signs. He hadn't wanted to take the Vidor stop, but the diocese insisted. They called it a necessary detour to build goodwill in struggling white parishes. Now, they were parked behind a boarded-up gas station in a town that felt frozen in time and rage. Still, Paul refused to let fear shape the evening. He had told the kids to stay in a van, to keep the doors locked, and to sing. Keep the faith moving forward. That was his line. Keep the faith moving forward. So they sang. Gloria's voice lifted first, steady and clear, leading the hymn. Kiana's harmony slid underneath her like silk. Jamal tapped the seatbelt buckle with 2 fingers in time, and Travis tapped the dashboard, grinning into the lens of his own recorder. Denise sat near the rear, eyes scanning the lot beyond the window, even as her voice joined the others. She was the first to hear the crunch of tires on gravel. The van jolted slightly when a truck pulled in and parked beside them. Travis reached for the volume dial, just as the music cut short. A knock at the van door. Not loud, but intentional. Reverend Paul was in the front seat, reading. He looked up. Another knock, louder this time. Paul rolled down the window halfway. Evening, he said politely. A white man in a stained mechanic's uniform leaned down. His hat cast a long shadow across his eyes. What y'all doing here? The man asked. Paul kept his voice calm. Resting. We're with a church group, traveling through. You got business here? No, sir, Paul replied. Just passing through. The man looked past him into the van, eyes scanning the rows of teenagers, the robes, the hymnals. You should keep moving, he said flatly. Before dark. Paul nodded slowly. We will. The man stared for another second, then stepped back and climbed into his truck. He didn't drive away. He just sat there, headlights off, engine idling. Denise moved up beside Paul. He's not leaving. I know. We need to go, Reverend. I know. Paul started the van. Maurice, sitting in the passenger seat, turned to him. You want me to drive? Paul looked at the gas gauge. Quarter tank. The next town was over 30 miles away. He wasn't sure they'd make it. Not with the detour they'd taken. No, he said. Let's wait a minute. They waited. The man's truck stayed still. Then a second truck pulled in. This one came from the opposite side of the lot. It parked behind the van, blocking the rear. Inside, the van went silent. Jamal reached for Gloria's hand. Travis instinctively reached for his recorder, pressing down on the record button again. His hand trembled. Outside, a third truck pulled in. The engines all idled. Paul whispered a prayer under his breath. Everyone stay calm, he said. Don't open any doors. Don't make any sudden moves. Just stay inside. A beam of light hit the driver's side window. A flashlight. Paul opened the door crack. We're just trying to leave, he called. No answer. Then the shouting began. Open the back. Get out of there. The kid screamed. Jamal ducked. Denise threw herself over Kiana. Paul pushed his door open and stepped out. Hands raised. They're children, he shouted. You don't want to do this. The tape recorder picked up only fragments of what came next. The static of movement. Cries. A scream. Denise or Kiana. No one could say for sure. The muffled thud of something hitting metal. The scrape of boots on gravel. Then silence. In the present, 30 years later, that same tape played softly in a locked room inside a forensic lab in Santa Fe. Dr. Amina Tucker sat in a chair beside Detective Marla Gaines, her jaw clenched tight as the voices from her childhood filled the room. That was Gloria, she said, eyes wet. I remember her voice. Marla nodded, but said nothing. She was focused on the tape, hands folded in her lap, eyes unmoving. They had both heard what came after the song, and they both knew what it meant. Outside the room, Devin Scott waited in the hallway. He had printed a map of the original choir tour route. Only one town sat off the main highway. Only one stop had never been mentioned in the final report. Vidor, Texas. Amina stood slowly, her voice quiet but sharp. They weren't forgotten. They were taken, and someone knew they'd never make it home. Marla looked up, and we're going to find out who. The old map had been folded so many times the edges had nearly disintegrated. Faint creases ran through faded ink lines and barely legible notes written in blue ballpoint pen. Devin Scott had found it deep in a cardboard box inside a back room of the New Light Church archive, in a storage closet no one had entered in years. The box was marked Youth Summer Materials, but half the folders inside were blank or water-stained. Only one contained a tour itinerary. Across the bottom of the page, in a line of small checkboxes, were handwritten city names: Jackson, Baton Rouge, Shreveport, Vidor, El Paso, and then, scrawled in different handwriting, a note: Vidor to Albuquerque, reroute approved. The words Vidor to Albuquerque were heavily scratched out in red ink. Underneath, someone had written, use secondary route, and no stops. Devin brought the map to Amina Tucker and Detective Marla Gaines. They studied it at the university's conference room table, surrounded by boxes of evidence and printed photos of the van, the name tags, and the recovered artifacts. Marla leaned over the map, tapping the scratched-out note. I've seen this before. Not this map, but that ink. That signature at the bottom. That's Bishop Thomas Reddin's handwriting. Amina glanced at her. You're sure? I sat across from him when I requested records back in 2001. He signed my denial letter. I never forgot the way he loops his R. Devin leaned back in his chair. If the diocese rerouted the van, then they knew where it was headed. That means someone intentionally changed the plan. Amina's jaw tensed, and someone wanted to make sure Vidor was the last stop. The room fell silent for a moment. Outside the window, the wind pushed through the cottonwood trees, hot and dry. Marla exhaled slowly. Then we need to talk to the bishop. Bishop Thomas Reddin lived in a Catholic retirement home on the outskirts of San Antonio. The facility was quiet, whitewashed, and heavily manicured. The kind of place built to look peaceful, not penitential. Reddin was 79 now, partially deaf and in and out of memory care. His name rarely appeared in church documents anymore, but in the early 90s, he had been one of the most influential clergy leaders in the South. When Amina and Marla arrived, they were escorted to a small sitting room with soft lighting and a faint smell of lavender cleaner. Reddin was wheeled in by an aide and parked near the window. His face sagged with age, but his eyes still carried alertness, if only in flashes. Bishop Reddin, Marla said gently, we came to ask you about the youth choir tour in 1993. The group from New Light. He blinked. Augusta. Yes, Marla continued. Do you remember the route they were assigned? He furrowed his brow. Was canceled. Heat wave. No air conditioning. Amina spoke next. But they went anyway. 7 of them. My uncle, Maurice Tucker, was driving. The bishop's eyes flinched. The name struck something. I signed off on fuel cards, he mumbled. Told them to go west, not south. Too much tension after Baton Rouge. Did you send them to Vidor? Amina asked. He looked down at his hands. I told them not to stop, he said. I said drive through. Don't stop. I told them. But the route was changed, Amina pressed. Someone rerouted them to New Mexico after Vidor. We found a van. 30 years later. In a reservoir. Reddin didn't respond. Marla reached into her bag and unfolded the invoice. She slid it onto his lap. It was dated June 14th, 1993. A handwritten receipt for a fuel refill and towing service issued to the Diocese of Georgia. Destination, Española, New Mexico. Vehicle type, 15-passenger van. Driver name, blank. Do you recognize this? Marla asked. He stared at it for several seconds. Then he nodded. I signed it, he said softly. Why? Amina demanded. Why would you tow the van all the way to New Mexico and never report anything? Why mark it as stolen? Reddin closed his eyes. Because they told me it was empty. Marla stepped forward. Who told you that? A man from the field office. Said the van was found abandoned after the kids ran off. Said there was no damage, but it was better if we didn't create more scandal. The world wasn't going to care about a few missing black children in East Texas. Amina clenched her fists. So you buried them in a report. You erased them. I believed him, Reddin whispered. I didn't ask more. Marla stared down at the bishop, disgust rising in her chest. You didn't ask more because it was convenient not to. He didn't deny it. Back at the university, Devin pulled up land registry record for the site listed on the towing invoice. The parcel outside Española had been church-owned land at the time, designated for a future retreat center. But that project never happened. In 2002, the land was sold to a solar energy company for installation of a large solar array. On the plans for that solar farm, one detail stood out: a cement foundation laid in 1993. It predated all construction by nearly a decade. The foundation had no listed purpose. Marla stood beside Amina as they examined the site records. Her voice was quiet. They didn't abandon the van there because it was remote. They buried something. Amina nodded, and they built right over it. That evening, Amina called Pastor Richard Elwood, the only living member of the new light staff from 1993 who hadn't gone on the trip. He answered after 3 rings. "Dr. Tucker," he said, his voice gruff but steady. "I heard. You knew, didn't you?" she asked. There was a pause. "I stayed behind that summer. I was 29. I knew they were going west. Redden said there'd been a misunderstanding, that they took the van and left. That Reverend Shepherd was no longer affiliated with the tour." "But you didn't believe him." "No," Elwood admitted. "I didn't. Why didn't you say anything?" He exhaled slowly. "Because I was young and afraid, and I wanted to stay in the church. And because I thought if they were really dead, someone else would care enough to find them." Amina's eyes burned. "Well, now I found them," she said. "And I'm not afraid." Elwood's voice broke. "God help you." She hung up the phone. Across the desert, the sun disappeared behind a ridge near Abiquiu. Somewhere beneath a concrete slab, 30 years of silence waited for a name. The solar field in Española stretched across dry hills like a sea of black glass. Quiet, sterile, efficient. The land beneath it had once belonged to the diocese, sold off in 2002, deeded without fanfare. On paper, the transfer was routine. But Amina Tucker and Detective Marla Gaines knew better. They had the invoice. They had the map. And now, they had permission. Marla stood beside the project manager near the base of the solar field's control tower. She handed over the paperwork slowly, watching the man's expression shift as he read. "This slab," she said, "it's not part of your build plan, is it?" He shook his head. "No. This concrete was already here. Our team poured around it. We just assumed it was part of a failed foundation." "It wasn't," Amina said behind him. "It was poured in the summer of 1993, before anything else was ever built." The man looked up, brow furrowed. "So what do you think's under it?" Amina didn't answer. She didn't want to say the word until she had proof. By noon, the equipment arrived: core drillers, scanners, forensic techs from Santa Fe. It took less than an hour to confirm what Marla already suspected. There were voids beneath the slab, uneven density, pockets of air that didn't belong. They scanned again, confirmed movement once existed there, shifting, organic disturbance before the concrete settled. No records of plumbing, no old septic system, just concrete poured over silence. The first drill cut through in the early afternoon. The scent was faint at first, then stronger. "Earth, old cloth, bone." They halted and called the coroner. Amina stood perfectly still. The sun dipped low as the forensic team worked through the evening. By nightfall, the outline was clear: 7 graves. 6 clustered together, small, shallow impressions. One set apart near the edge, larger, alone. The first body was pulled gently from the earth. Child-sized, curled in fetal position, cloth scraps still clinging to the ribcage. A faded robe sleeve clung to the shoulder, hemmed in pink thread. One pendant remained around the neck, rusted, heart-shaped, the initials KB etched faintly inside. Kiana Brooks. Amina looked away, pressing her fingers into her eyes. Marla rested a hand on her shoulder, but said nothing. One by one, the others came up. 2 showed signs of fractured wrists. One had damage to the skull, blunt force trauma. The bodies had been laid gently. No markers, no caskets, no dignity. Only the weight of poured cement to press them into oblivion. The last grave held Reverend Paul Shepherd. He was buried kneeling, arms crossed over his chest, head turned downward, like he had died praying. The local paper ran a quiet headline the next morning. Remains found at Española Solar Field tied to 1993 church van case. No national coverage. No press conference. The church issued a 2-paragraph statement. A tragic incident rooted in miscommunication. We mourn the loss of those who never returned. But then a man came forward. His name was Ellis Riker. He was 68 now, a former mechanic who lived in Jasper County, just outside Vidor. He had seen the headline and recognized the names. He called Marla himself. They met him at a diner 2 days later, his hands trembling as he poured sugar into black coffee. He looked down as he spoke, never once meeting Amina's eyes. In '93, I was running the tow line for a guy who did side work for the church, he said. I got a call late June. Said there was a van that needed relocating, no questions asked. Paid in cash. He wiped his hands with a napkin. They said the van was stolen by a group of kids. That the church didn't want a scene. Said I was doing them a favor, getting rid of something that would cause bad press. Marla leaned forward. Who gave you the call? He hesitated. Someone from the Vidor field office. Name's gone now, I'm sure. They said they'd handle the paperwork. Told me where to meet the truck. When I got there, the van was already chained up. I didn't look inside. I didn't want to. You towed it to Española, Amina said. 700 miles. Didn't know what was in it, he whispered. Didn't want to know. Did you see anything? Marla pressed. He looked up then for the first time. There was a pink robe sleeve. Pressed to the window. Silence wrapped around them. Amina sat back, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't ask why he hadn't said anything in 30 years. She already knew. No one would have listened. They returned to Augusta the following week. New Light Missionary Baptist Church was still standing, though the paint had faded and the pews creaked under age. Pastor Richard Elwood met them at the front steps, his shoulders heavy. He showed them a room where he kept old church records, long sealed and ignored. In a locked drawer, beneath birth registries and tithing logs, was a file marked 1993 tour. It contained a single itinerary, one photo of the group, and a letter addressed to him from Bishop Redden. The letter read, following reports of behavioral disruption, Reverend Shepherd's leadership is being reviewed. The group is no longer under official diocesan sanction. We trust your discretion. Amina stared at the letter, rage simmering in her throat. They called it a behavioral issue, she said. That's how they justified burying children. Elwood looked away. I'm sorry. She nodded slowly. You're not the one who needs to apologize. That evening, a small prayer vigil was held in the church's sanctuary. Just a few families, a few candles, old voices singing hymns that hadn't been sung in decades. Marla sat in the back pew, watching Amina stand at the altar, the pendant from Kiana's robe resting in her hand. There was no resurrection coming. No undoing would have been done. But there would be truth, and it would not be buried again. The church bell in Augusta rang 7 times. Not for Sunday service, not for morning prayer, but for each soul the congregation had waited 3 decades to bury. The sanctuary at New Light Missionary Baptist Church was packed, pews overflowing. Some came from out of state, clutching photographs folded in wallets. Others were younger, the children of those who once sang in the same choir, now old enough to understand what had been taken. 7 framed portraits lined the altar. Kiana Brooks, 14. Jamal Rivers, 13. Denise Hill, 16. Travis Milton, 16. Gloria Bell, 15. Maurice Tucker, 17. Reverend Paul Shepherd, 48. Each photo was surrounded by flowers and draped in choir robes, carefully restored by local seamstresses to match what they would have worn that summer in 1993. Dr. Amina Tucker stood at the pulpit. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry except for her Uncle Morris's wristwatch, which had been recovered near the van's driver's seat, broken at 11:23 p.m., the time of death, or close enough to it. Her voice didn't shake. They told the world our families were liars. They said our kids left the church, but they didn't leave. They were taken, and someone knew. She paused, scanning the crowd, eyes locked on her. Not tears alone, but anger, gratitude, recognition. They were erased, not by fire, not by accident, but by quiet decisions. A line in a letter, a skipped report, a van no one bothered to follow. And when the earth dried, when the reservoir cracked, it was the ground, not the church, that gave them back. Silence settled like dust. And now, Amina said, we will not let them disappear again. Detective Marla Gaines stepped forward and took the podium. She unfolded a small book, aged and soft, its pages curled inward like a hand in prayer. She didn't have to explain what it was. Everyone in the room recognized it. Denise Hill's diary, recovered from under the third row of seats in the van, sealed in a backpack covered in mold. It had been preserved for reasons no one could explain. The water hadn't taken the words. The ink, though faint, remained. Marla read aloud. We're almost through Texas. The gas station was mean. Gloria said her song will sound better in El Paso where the wind don't choke her throat. Reverend Paul says don't worry about the looks we get. God sees us. I believe him. I hope he hears me. She turned to the final page. If this is the last note I sing, let it reach my mama. There were no dry eyes. After the service, the procession moved outside, where the memorial plaques had been installed in a semicircle beneath the old choir rehearsal tree. Each stone bore a name. Beneath it, a verse from the hymn they'd last recorded. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. As the sun dipped low, the church doors opened once more. Inside, the new youth choir filed in, 24 voices strong. Children, teenagers, young adults. None had known the original choir personally, but every one of them had grown up hearing fragments of the story. Whispers. Now, they sang with full truth. They stood where the seven once rehearsed and lifted their voices in the same hymn. The melody swelled, high and clear. Only this time, they added something new. Each verse ended with a name. I sing because I'm happy for Gloria Bell. I sing because I'm free for Jamal Rivers. For his eye is on the sparrow, for Denise Hill. And I know he watches me, for Travis Milton. And I know he watches me, for Kiana Brooks. And I know he watches me, for Maurice Tucker. And I know he watches me, for Reverend Paul Shepard. The last chord rang out and drifted upward into the rafters. Amina sat in the front pew, tears on her cheeks, but no grief in her posture. She had done what no one else had dared to. She had listened when the church stayed silent. She had dug when others paved over. And she wasn't finished. 3 months later, Amina stood before a different kind of crowd. This time, it was in a city hall conference room in Atlanta, where journalists, legal advocates, and families of the missing waited to hear her speak. Behind her hung a simple banner with bold black letters, Choir of the Silenced Foundation. She took the podium and adjusted the mic. We are here because some children come home and some don't. And far too often, which ones do depends on what they look like, where they come from, and how much noise their absence makes. A pause. I founded this organization to make sure the noise never stops. To ensure that no black child, no black teenager, no black community leader is ever dismissed as just another disappearance. We will track cases. We will fund searches. We will challenge churches and governments and police departments. And we will not be quiet. Behind her, photographs of other missing children from the past 4 decades line the wall. Some are never looked for. Some are blamed for their own disappearance. Some, like the choir, have been buried long before anyone went looking. But now someone was, and someone always would be. Amina's final words were simple. We were told to grieve privately. Now we seek justice publicly. The room rose to their feet in applause. On the steps of New Light that same evening, the final touches were made to a new stained glass window. Designed by local artists, it showed a sun rising behind a church van, music notes floating through desert wind. At the base stood 7 silhouettes, hands clasped, heads bowed, not in mourning, but in harmony. As the light passed through the glass, color poured into the sanctuary. Reds, golds, soft purples. It lit the faces of the choir as they rehearsed. It danced across the pews. And for the first time in 30 years, it reached the far back wall, the one they used to avoid mentioning. The wall with the names. The wall no one would ever forget again.